Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having me. My name is Anthony Apollo. I am the Executive Director of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. I will quickly leave this slide up just so you know that everything that I will be speaking about is my own opinion. I don't speak on behalf of the Commission. I am yet their humble emissary here to tell you about everything we're building in the US state of Wyoming. So first, a couple of notes about myself. I've been in this role as the Executive Director of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission for just over 2 years now. But before that, I was not in government and candidly did not have an expectation to be working in government. I actually spent the first half of my career in the traditional finance sector, working in some of the big banks in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, and at the same time began learning about Bitcoin and Ethereum. This has been late 2015, and seeing the problems that all these big banks were having and then the efficiencies of digital assets and blockchain made me segue my career in that direction pretty quickly. I joined Consensus, which is an Ethereum incubator in New York, in late 2017. And since then, I have worked on many projects, including tokenized intellectual property, securities, tokenized securities, and also did a program where we were creating digital multimedia and had real-time payouts to content creators and codified royalties via smart contracts. But I moved to Wyoming because of the very permissive legislative framework the state had created over several years. And the one I'd like to speak about today is the Wyoming Stable Token Act. This act was passed in March of 2023, and it did two important things. The first was create the Wyoming Stable Token Commission, and the second was giving it the mandate to create the Wyoming Stable Token. Now, the Wyoming Stable Token is the first fiat-backed and fully reserved stablecoin to be issued by a public entity in the United States of America. And you could see a couple of notes here about this program and about the token itself. First is that it's statutorily mandated. It is the law in the state of Wyoming that we are going to go release this stable token. Secondly, it can be purchased and redeemed for $1. It's pretty straightforward for a stable token. We also have backed that token with a very conservative and standard blend of cash, short duration US Treasuries, and repurchases thereof. Yet those are still interest bearing, so we can generate funds based on those reserves. And I will note that we are issued on public permissionless infrastructure, currently on 7 blockchains through our work with LayerZero. More on that in a few minutes. So why is Wyoming looking to issue its own stable token? Well, the first is cohesion. This program is meant to be the glue that will tie many of Wyoming's different digital asset initiatives together. We'll talk more about those quickly on the next slide. The second is revenue diversification. So Wyoming generates most of its money from oil and gas. Now that's a finite resource. So Wyoming is always looking for new ways to generate revenues in the state. And again, since we back the Wyoming Stable Token with US Treasuries, i.e. US debt, and those pay interest to the debt holders, that is a way for us to bring in net new dollars to the state of Wyoming. And then finally, it's the state's second attempt at a fully reserved financial instrument, i.e. something you could pay with that has its value, again, for us, $1, or a little more behind it. And the reason for that is before the Stable Token Act passed, Wyoming had created a chartered financial institution called a Special Purpose Depository Institution. Essentially, it was a bank that could custody digital assets provided they were 100% reserved with a bit of extra collateralization behind it. Unfortunately, in the US, the prior presidential administration under President Biden came down very heavily on that structure, and there's now a lot of lawsuits around it that Wyoming is fighting because of how our financial structure was treated. But while that has all been happening in the background, we have gone ahead and worked to bring the Wyoming Stable Token forward as a second way to get a fully reserved financial instrument into the hands of Wyoming citizens. We're not going to go through all of these, but I wanted to give the audience today an idea of how much Wyoming as a state has done in this sector. So since 2016, this state has put forth 80 different bills for cryptocurrency, blockchain, and digital assets. 50 of those have passed, most of them signed into law by our governor, Mark Gordon. And you could see that there's different, we'll call them verticals, that we look to pass this legislation in to move forward things like property rights or privacy. We have a rule or a law in the state of Wyoming that you cannot be compelled to give up your private keys in any civil or criminal proceeding because we are the state, and under the US Constitution, First Amendment, freedom of speech, the state cannot compel speech. We cannot make you tell us what your private keys are. And that's one of the key privacy protections we have. We've also created different business structures. In Wyoming, you can come and register your decentralized autonomous organization under an LLC structure. And then again, we've called out the Wyoming Stable Token as a revenue diversifier. I'll also note, sometimes there are comparisons made to what we built to a CBDC, and we fight against that quite fervently. We actually passed a bill earlier this year that defines what a CBDC is and prevents any state agency from using one. That's our anti-CBDC bill. In terms of use cases, we'll be a bit broad here, but really the point I want to get across is the Wyoming Stable Token is not being built solely for use in Wyoming. It's meant to be used domestically, it's meant to be used internationally, it's meant to be used in DeFi applications. And we've highlighted what some of those are here, whether they're institutional or retail. So what does a US stable token, what does a US state-issued stable token offer that the currently issued incumbents cannot or do not? So first is, the Wyoming Stable Token is a public good. I mentioned a few minutes ago that we back the stable token with US debt. That bears interest. Those dollars come back to the state. On a quarterly basis, those dollars are swept into the state's school foundation fund. So the goal of our stable token is to pay for schools in the state. We also have a tremendous amount of oversight. We are overseen by the governor, who is our chairman, the state auditor, the state treasurer, and all of our meetings happen in public. That includes public comment. Obviously, a stable token wants to stay stable. Not only are we one-to-one backed through a trust account, but we also have a requirement, again, through the legislation, to have a 2% over-collateralization of the stable token. So at scale, the goal for us is to have, for every stable token, $1.02 in the bank behind it. From a distribution perspective, it's important to note that we are issuing the Wyoming Stable Token as a state, not a bank nor a trust, nor a state-owned bank or a state-owned trust. It is a state itself, and we are a sovereign entity. That allows us to go cross-border much more easy than others because we are not subject to a global network of regulations. The EU and the Markets and Crypto Asset Regulation Framework will not be telling the state of Wyoming what to do. We're also highly transparent, again, kind of in lockstep with the oversight. For example, we have rules that we promulgate as an agency that have to go through a 45-day public comment period. All of our materials are public. You can look at them on our website and see everything we've done since day one. And we've already talked a lot about privacy. I will note that the state has additional restrictions on what data we are allowed to collect. And again, I think this helps defend against some of the arguments that we are a central bank digital currency. In terms of our current status, we've launched the first of these Wyoming stable tokens as the Frontier Stable Token, or FRONT, on 7 interoperable blockchains through our partnership with LayerZero. So we're already on Ethereum, Avalanche, Solana, Arbitrum, Polygon Base, and Polygon. That we've launched on those blockchains, on those networks on August 19th. And we hope that they are available for sale. We say Q4 2025, but I hope that is very, very early Q4, coming soon. In terms of future initiatives, the state is seeing the great progress we've made in a very short amount of time with this initiative. So the legislature, particularly the Select Committee on Blockchain that oversees us, is looking to potentially expand the scope of this agency so that we can also work on a yield-bearing stablecoin in the US, which would be fairly, candidly speaking, one of the only ones, being that a lot of the yield-bearing stable tokens have gone offshore or are closed off to only accredited investors. There's a lot of interest in real-world assets as well, because the state of Wyoming is rich in uranium, which is needed for small-scale modular nuclear reactors. We're rich in rare earths that allow us to build GPUs. So there's a lot of interest in getting those assets on-chain. And then quickly, based on the fact that we are here for Korea Blockchain Week and some of the conversations we've had with some of the legislators in the National Assembly, we've been asked for our thoughts and our feedback on stablecoin legislation all around the world. The first thing I would say to anyone or any government working on stablecoins is to embrace open source technology. Our team has put a lot of work and effort into what we call our blockchain selection exercise, which we do on a quarterly basis. The goal of that exercise is to identify blockchains that can help us and scale for a retail use case, have appropriate compliance and feature richness that we can launch on. It's a lengthy exercise. We do it on every quarter, and it's available on our website. So if you want to take a look at all the work we've done to date, you can see it there, and please give us your feedback. Secondly, I think it's important to define privately issued stablecoins versus publicly issued ones. We look a lot different in some ways than the privately issued stablecoins. In some ways, we don't. But one of the important things to note is that because we are publicly issued, we are not under the Genius Act at the federal level in the United States. So that will govern stablecoins that are issued from private issuers, and we will have our own compliance framework, which again, we built through legislation and rulemaking. I would also note the importance of working with local and aligned jurisdictions. There's many different countries working on this right now, and I think they all should be talking to each other. As a final note, I think that one of the things that can be done amongst the states and across nations is working on liquidity pools with different fiat-backed stablecoins. So the ability to contribute frontier stable tokens to one side of a liquidity pool and withdraw a stable one. I think that's something that can have a massive impact on Forex markets, and I would be interested in starting that exercise as soon as possible. Again, my name has been Anthony Apollo. I'm working on the Wyoming Stable Token. Please take a look at that QR code. That'll bring you to our website where you can see all the information. And thank you for your time today, and thank you for hosting. Appreciate it.